Hey guys, Tony here from Tectonic Byte, and this is the Pixel 2 and this is the OnePlus 5T. Which phone should you buy and why? So let's first start off with the design of these phones, and as for the Pixel 2, it has a pretty good design. The top third of the back is made of glass, and the bottom 2/3 of the phone is made of aluminum, and it's stained with a type of plastic that feels really good in the hand. It feels kind of grippy and it doesn't feel like it's gonna fall off. And as for the front of the phone, it doesn't really look appealing. The bezels are humongous and it looks like a phone straight out of 2015. And honestly, I have no clue what Google was thinking. Maybe they thought their fanboys would be okay with this, but I'm not okay with it. So as for the design of the OnePlus 5T, the back is made of anodized aluminum, and it feels pretty good in the hand without a case, though I probably wouldn't use it without a case because these phones are precious and they're pretty expensive as well. The design resembles an iPhone 7 Plus, and I honestly don't know why they blatantly copied it. And it's so apparent because the dual camera setup, the flash setup, the fingerprint, not the fingerprint setup though, but everything just resembles an iPhone 7 Plus. And as for the front of the OnePlus 5T, the screen is humongous and absolutely gorgeous. I really love the 6.01-inch display, and it's really immersive, especially compared to the Pixel 2. And as for the bezels, it's nearly bezel-less, which is very nice, and overall it's a pretty good experience. However, one thing that I do not like about it, and it's just my personal experience, but the OnePlus 5T is a pretty big phone and it doesn't fit that well in my hand, though it does feel pretty luxurious because it's big and the screen is very nice. And as for the display, I've touched on this a little bit just a couple moments ago, but as for the display of the Pixel 2, it has a 5-inch 1080p display and it's pretty good. The colors are sort of saturated, yet they're not as saturated as the OnePlus 5T, and honestly 1080p is good enough because I want to conserve on battery life, and especially nowadays I, along with many people, use their phones extensively, so having a great battery life is more important than screen resolution. And you honestly can't tell much of a difference between 1080p and say 4K on a smartphone because they're so small. And as for the display on the OnePlus 5T, it is a 6.01 Full HD Plus display, which is nearly bezel-less. And as I said before, the display is really immersive. I really like the experience. And compared to the Pixel 2, the display is absolutely huge and it is a really nice experience. However, the colors seem to be more saturated than the Pixel 2, and this was shown when I did the camera comparison test. And honestly, when I took both photos, I looked at them just on the smartphone screens, and it was apparent that the OnePlus 5T made the colors look a lot more saturated, but when I put it into the video editor, it looked less saturated, which was kind of weird. So I guess maybe they're just oversaturating their screens just a little bit. And as for the camera, I did a full camera comparison just a couple weeks ago, and they both have very great cameras. But as for the Pixel 2, it has only one camera with an f1.7 aperture and 12 megapixels, and for stabilization it has optical image stabilization along with electronic image stabilization, so you're gonna get pretty stabilized shots. And as for video recording, it records up to 4K at 30 frames per second, and the video is actually incredibly sharp, and I really like the video recording. As for the OnePlus 5T's cameras, the main camera has an f1.7 aperture with a 27mm full frame equivalence and 16 megapixels. And as for stabilization, it only has electronic image stabilization, which is pretty decent, and sometimes it looks like a gimbal because it's pretty good, but other times it looks pretty warped because it's only electronic, and it makes the image look really messed up and unnatural. And as for video recording, the OnePlus 5T records up to 4K at 30 frames per second, and I find it quite weird that 1080p recording looked just a little bit sharper than 4K, which is quite weird. And as for the secondary sensor, it has only electronic image stabilization as well, and 20 megapixels along with intelligent pixel technology. Now, the secondary sensor is basically only used for portrait and low light photography, and I have to say it does a pretty good job. However, the quality is comparable to the Pixel 2 digitally zoomed. Okay, so now that you've seen the camera comparison test, as for video recording, I have to give it to the Pixel 2 because 4K looks very sharp. Electronic image stabilization and optical image stabilization renders a more natural image, and the stabilization looks a lot better than the OnePlus 5T. However, it's somewhat personal preference because the OnePlus 5T does have more intense stabilization because it's only electronic, and depending on the situation, sometimes it looks like it's on a gimbal, which is quite amazing. However, in other times, like when I was running, it looked incredibly warped because it was trying to compensate for the crazy camera shake. So if you want very natural stabilization, I'd go for the Pixel 2, whereas if you want more intense stabilization, I'd go for the OnePlus 5T. Now as for battery life on the Pixel 2, it says right now that I have 20 hours left, but I've kind of only used it a little bit today since I've just been recording videos. The battery life lasts me about a whole day of off and on usage, and that includes social media browsing, using the camera, using different apps such as games and stuff. And I use it throughout my school day, and it does a pretty good job. And I also use a calculator, I use notes, I use all these applications, and it lasts me a full day. I don't know the specific capacity, but based on my personal experience, it lasts about a full day. And as for the OnePlus 5T, the battery life is more or less the same. The battery life lasts about a full day of off and on usage, which consists of social media browsing, using various apps like games and calculators, and the calculator apps and notes, and the camera. Also, if you leave it on standby, it probably lasts more or less than a week, but honestly, most people use their smartphones intensely like I do, so I doubt it will last that long. So there's no clear winner on the battery life because I've had a similar experience with both of them. But if you want the best battery life, I'd probably go for the OnePlus 5T because it has a higher capacity. Now as for software, the Pixel 2 runs the latest version of Android Oreo at Android 8.1, and stock Android is a very nice experience. Coming from iOS, I have to say it's really similar. Switching between apps is incredibly fast. Launching apps is also equally fast. And I really like the experience of stock Android. There's no bloatware, so it offers a really fluid experience, and I really like it a lot. From all the months that I've used this Pixel 2, it has never lagged, and I find that it's a really quick and snappy experience. And as for the OnePlus 5T, it's also the same case. It runs Oxygen OS, which is basically like stock Android but with OnePlus's skin on top of it. OnePlus basically adds optimizations and tiny features that add to the experience of the OnePlus 5T. I really like their tiny optimizations because they improve the user experience a lot. As for performance, it isn't that far off from stock Android. Switching between apps is equally fast, and honestly, I can't tell much of a difference between Oxygen OS and stock Android. There isn't even much bloatware on Oxygen OS. Actually, I doubt there's any. So basically, Oxygen OS is stock Android but with just tiny improvements. So now concerning performance, the Pixel 2 has really nice specs with the Qualcomm Snapdragon 835 chip and the Adreno 540 GPU. And as for RAM, it has 4GB of RAM, which might seem mediocre, especially now in 2018. But nowadays, with software optimization on the Pixel 2, it still performs really well. Based on my day-to-day usage, I have to say the specs seem kind of average, but honestly, it's a pretty fluid experience. Like what I said before, switching between apps is pretty snappy, and launching apps is also fast. And as for the OnePlus 5T, it has a Snapdragon 835 processor, also with the Adreno 540 GPU. And this configuration has 6GB RAM, although you can get 8GB RAM, but I don't know why you'd need that much on a phone. And you'd expect the OnePlus 5T to be substantially better than the Pixel 2, but they're quite comparable in terms of performance because they both launch apps equally fast and they do a pretty good job. However, I noticed a slight edge with the OnePlus 5T because of that extra RAM, but I don't really think the average consumer would need that much. As for the speakers of the Pixel 2, it has two front-firing speakers, and I have to say they do a really nice job. The audio sounds really crisp, and it gets pretty loud as well, and I really like the experience. Now, they took away the headphone jack, and with the front-firing speakers, I have to say this was a good trade-off because I really like the front-firing speakers, so when I'm not using headphones, I can just use these. However, I kind of miss the headphone jack because I have to always take out the dongle, which is quite inconvenient. And as for the speaker of the OnePlus 5T, it only has one bottom-firing speaker, and it's not as good as the Pixel 2. However, it has a headphone jack, so I guess it makes up for that in that case. If you listen to the comparison of this, the Pixel 2 sounds a little bit better. And here's the comparison test. water resistance on the Pixel 2, it has an IP67 rating, and so it can basically survive under 1 meter of water. And I haven't really tested this out because I'm not willing to test it out on a smartphone. But I have to say that it probably would survive under moderate conditions in water. And as for the OnePlus 5T, it secretly has water resistance. OnePlus says that it has splash resistance, but a YouTuber named Matthew Moniz, he tested this out and it actually survives underwater. But I probably wouldn't try this because if it's not certified water resistant, I wouldn't trust it. But they both can survive underwater. So let's talk about some additional features that both of these phones have. So as for the Pixel 2, it has the active edge feature, which is the squeeze feature. And I initially thought this was a gimmick because I was like, why would I squeeze a phone for essentially Siri? But actually, I find this really useful because I find that I have to use Google Assistant quite often, like when I have to check the molar mass of an element just for chemistry homework, or when I have to multiply something really quick or convert Pascals to atmospheric pressure, because honestly, it's been pretty useful to just squeeze it and ask a question really quick. So I actually find it quite useful, and it's not really a gimmick anymore because I've grown to use it quite often. And as for the OnePlus 5T, one feature that I really like about it is the alert slider, and it's quite useful because you can just turn on and off notifications. And honestly, it's quite useful because maybe you're about to go to sleep and you don't want to turn off your phone, you don't want to waste time, you just have to flick the slider and it does the job like that. So as for my concluding thoughts, I have to say both of these phones are really great phones, and ultimately it also comes down to personal preference because screen size also plays a part in your buying decision. But let's first recap the Pixel 2. So I'd buy the Pixel 2 if you prioritize software and camera over anything else, because the software is just so fluid and I highly doubt there will be much lag over the next couple years, and you get software updates consistently for 3 years, which Google says. And I think that's pretty good because most people don't keep their phones for after 3 years. So you're gonna get really consistent updates, and if it does happen to lag, you're gonna know that eventually there's gonna be an update, so it's not gonna be permanent lag. As for the camera of the Pixel 2, I really like this camera. The image processing is just out of this world. Every picture that I've taken with this camera is super sharp, and optical image stabilization ensures that the sharpness is gonna be there, because if you have a little bit of shake, it's gonna be reduced. And portrait mode on the Pixel 2 does a really good job. There's slight artifacting around the sides of the subject, though you won't notice it unless you zoom in. And the bokeh looks pretty good, although it looks quite unnatural. Also on the portrait mode, the pictures are overly sharpened, which I guess could be a good thing because you want your subject to be sharp and the background to be out of focus. And it emphasizes the background blur, which is great, but sometimes you can see all the pimples on the subject and you can see all the fine details that maybe sometimes you don't want to see. And as for the OnePlus 5T, I'd get this phone if you value a very feature-rich phone at especially a pretty reasonable price, because the price is slightly cheaper than the Pixel 2. Also, if you value screen size, I'd get this phone as well because the screen is just very big, and it's nice compared to the Pixel 2 because the Pixel 2 screen is very tiny. So considering all the features that the OnePlus 5T has, and for the pretty reasonable price, I'd have to say that it's also a very nice contender. As for my personal preference, I personally prefer the Pixel 2 because the camera is really good, and the software is just very reliable. I can trust it over the next couple years, and I know that I'm always going to get consistent updates. And as for the OnePlus 5T, I don't really like the oversaturation, although sometimes it looks nice. So if you prefer having a ton of features over just software and camera, and you prefer a well-rounded phone, I'd go with the OnePlus 5T. And if you want a really premium phone with camera, smooth software, then I'd go with the Pixel 2. Thank you all so much for watching, and if you enjoyed, please leave a like and subscribe because it helps out the channel an absolute ton. And YouTube is demonetizing my channel on February 20th, so I'm not going to be able to make even 1 cent on my videos. And if you'd like to support me, leaving a like and subscribing would actually help me out a ton because it would motivate me to keep going even though I wouldn't make any money whatsoever.